She fell from the stagecoach covered in blood until the cowboy caught her. Clara had been looking forward to this journey for weeks, yet now that she was actually on the stagecoach, a knot of anxiety twisted in her stomach. The wooden wheels rattled over the rough trail, and the dry wind whipped her hair across her face. She clutched her small leather satchel tightly, feeling the weight of the few belongings she carried inside. They were simple things: a change of clothes, a few personal letters, and a small locket that held a picture of her mother. Though the items were few, they were precious, and she felt the need to guard them carefully. The landscape stretched endlessly around her. Rolling hills of dry grass and patches of scrubby trees gave way to jagged rocks that jutted from the earth. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that made the terrain look both beautiful and dangerous. Clara pressed her forehead to the window of the stagecoach, trying to make herself calm. She had traveled before, but never on a road this isolated. Her thoughts kept returning to the warnings she had heard from travelers in town about highwaymen who sometimes roamed these parts, looking for stagecoaches to rob. Her heart beat faster at the memory, though she tried to reassure herself that nothing would happen. Inside the stagecoach, a few other passengers stirred. There was an older man sitting across from Clara, hunched over a folded newspaper. He did not look up, seemingly absorbed in the printed words, though Clara noticed the slight trembling of his hands as he held the paper. Beside him, a mother tried to quiet a small child who was fidgeting in the cramped space, the child's restless movements making the mother sigh repeatedly. Clara caught the eye of a man in the corner, a tall figure with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. He did not speak, and his folded arms suggested a quiet wariness. She felt a little uneasy, but there was something reassuring in his calm, steady presence. As the stagecoach rumbled along, Clara listened to the sounds outside: the clatter of hooves on rocks, the creaking of the coach's wooden frame, and the occasional bird that called from a distant tree. She thought about home, about the family she would see soon, and the friends who waited for her return. The journey was long, and the road was rough, but she told herself that it would all be worth it once she reached her destination. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip lower, bathing the hills in a warm, golden light. Clara's thoughts drifted, and for a moment she almost felt safe. The older man finally lowered his newspaper and looked out the window, giving her a faint nod. The mother managed to calm her child, who now rested quietly on her lap. Even the man with the low hat adjusted his position, appearing more relaxed. It seemed as though the world had settled into a gentle rhythm, the stagecoach rolling steadily through the wilderness. But then a sudden jolt broke the quiet. The stagecoach lurched violently to one side, throwing Clara slightly from her seat. She gripped the edge of the bench to steady herself, heart racing. The driver shouted, urging the horses forward, and the coach rocked again over a particularly rough patch of trail. Clara's stomach churned with fear. The isolation of the road, the uneven terrain, and the creaking of the coach reminded her of the stories she had been told, the tales of travelers who had vanished without a trace. She tried to push the thoughts away, focusing instead on the distant hills bathed in the soft evening light. The man with the low hat shifted again, and this time he spoke. His voice was low but steady. "It's easy to get scared out here," he said. "But we've got to trust the horses and the driver. They know the road better than we do." Clara nodded silently, grateful for his words, though the fear still lingered. The older man muttered something under his breath about keeping an eye on the horizon, and the mother whispered softly to her child, assuring him that they were almost through this stretch of wilderness. As the stagecoach continued, Clara tried to focus on her breathing, taking slow, steady breaths to calm the panic rising in her chest. She watched the scenery pass by, rocks and hills giving way to small patches of trees, and then the occasional glimpse of a distant river sparkling in the sun. The world outside was wild and untamed, but there was a strange beauty to it that made her momentarily forget the fear in her heart. She imagined what it would be like to explore the hills on foot, to wander freely among the rocks and trees, though she quickly reminded herself that she was not a traveler seeking adventure. She was simply trying to get home safely. Even as she tried to calm herself, Clara noticed a change in the atmosphere. The shadows were growing longer, and the wind carried a faint chill. The horses' hooves clattered more loudly against the stones, and the driver's voice called sharper commands. Something about the rhythm of the stagecoach felt different, as though the trail itself had grown more dangerous. She looked around at the other passengers, seeing the tension mirrored in their faces. The older man had his newspaper folded tightly under his arm, the mother held her child closer, and the tall man with the low hat had his eyes fixed on the horizon, alert for any sign of trouble. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. She was aware of every sound, the rasp of leather on wood, the distant cry of a hawk, the sudden snap of a twig somewhere off the trail. Her imagination began to play tricks on her, making her think she saw figures moving in the shadows, waiting to leap out. She shook her head, telling herself it was only the wind and the uneven light. Yet the uneasy feeling would not leave her. The stagecoach hit another rough patch, and Clara felt herself lifted slightly off her seat as the wheels bounced over rocks. She held on tightly, her knuckles white, and whispered a small prayer that the journey would continue safely. The man with the low hat caught her eye briefly and gave a faint nod, as if acknowledging her fear without needing to speak it aloud. The older man muttered again, this time about how these hills had seen many travelers and how most made it through just fine, though his tone lacked conviction. As the sun began to set completely, the sky turned a deep orange, fading to purple, and then finally to the dark blue of night. Clara could barely make out the trail ahead, relying on the faint glow of the lanterns at the front of the stagecoach. The world around her felt both endless and claustrophobic, the open hills stretching into darkness, yet the narrow coach walls trapping her inside. She felt the isolation of the wilderness keenly, realizing how vulnerable she truly was. Clara tried to focus on the simple things to keep calm, counting the bumps of the wheels, humming a quiet tune to herself, feeling the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. Yet, every shadow and every sudden sound made her heart race. She imagined stories of travelers who had vanished here, leaving behind only scattered belongings and echoes of their fear. Her grip on her satchel tightened, as if holding on to her belongings could also keep her safe. Finally, the driver called out to warn of a particularly sharp turn ahead. The stagecoach swerved slightly, and Clara had to brace herself against the bench. Her heart pounded in her ears. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the faint scent of the dry hills. For a moment, Clara felt a wave of despair, alone, tired, and surrounded by an unforgiving wilderness. She whispered to herself that she had to stay calm, that she could not let fear take over, no matter how terrifying the journey felt. As night fell fully, Clara noticed the stars appearing one by one, small points of light against the deep black sky. They seemed distant and unreachable, yet somehow comforting in their presence. The world outside remained vast and wild, but the stars gave her a sense of connection to something greater, a reminder that she was not entirely alone. She breathed deeply, trying to draw strength from the sight. And yet, as the stagecoach continued down the winding trail, Clara could not shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change her journey forever. She did not know what form it would take, only that the quiet tension of the road, the shadows that seemed to stretch longer, and the isolated wilderness all hinted at an approaching danger. Clara's mind raced with possibilities, each one more frightening than the last. She tried to focus on practical thoughts, how she would reach the next town, how she could keep her belongings safe, how she could survive if anything went wrong. The man with the low hat seemed to sense her fear, glancing briefly at her with a reassuring nod, though his expression remained unreadable. The older man muttered again under his breath, and the mother soothed her child, each small action reminding Clara that she was not completely alone. By the time the moon rose high in the sky, casting a silver glow over the hills, Clara had grown weary. Her muscles ached from holding herself steady, her hands were stiff from gripping her satchel, and her mind was exhausted from the constant tension. Yet she could not sleep, knowing that at any moment the stagecoach could hit another rough patch or encounter the dangers she had feared all along. She closed her eyes for brief moments, imagining herself safe at home, and then opened them again, ready to face whatever came next. The night stretched on, each hour feeling longer than the last. Clara's senses were heightened, the creak of the coach, the clatter of the horses, the whisper of wind through the rocks, all seemed amplified in the darkness. She felt the loneliness of the wilderness pressing in, yet there was also a strange beauty in the night, a quiet majesty that made her forget her fear for brief moments. As the first hints of dawn approached, Clara felt a glimmer of hope. The dark of night was beginning to fade, and the promise of morning light offered the chance of safety and warmth. But she could not yet relax. The road was still treacherous, the hills still wild, and the world around her full of uncertainty. Clara braced herself for the final stretch of the journey, unaware that the most terrifying moment of her life was about to come. The stagecoach continued its journey as dawn broke over the hills, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. Clara's muscles ached from the long night, and the rough ride had left her feeling stiff and sore. The shadows of the hills grew shorter as the morning light spread across the landscape, and for a moment, Clara allowed herself to breathe more easily. The road ahead looked calmer, safer. Maybe the worst of the journey was behind her, but peace in the Wild West rarely lasted long. Without warning, Clara heard the sharp crack of a whip and the distant shouts of men. Her heart leapt into her throat. She turned her head toward the front of the coach and saw figures moving in the hills ahead. The shapes were men, rough, armed, and masked, emerging from behind rocks and trees. The stagecoach driver shouted, panic lacing his voice, as the horses sensed danger and snorted nervously. Clara's pulse raced. She tried to remain calm, clutching her satchel tightly against her chest. The other passengers froze as the masked men approached, waving pistols and shouting commands. The older man grabbed his newspaper like a shield, though it offered no protection. The mother pulled her child close, whispering urgently that everything would be all right. The tall man with the low hat tensed, his hand brushing the handle of a small revolver tucked into his belt. Everyone understood instantly. The stagecoach was under attack. The first robber swung his arm toward the driver, demanding the reins. "Stop the coach," he shouted. "Hand over your valuables." The horses bolted, sensing the fear in the driver's voice and the sudden chaos. The stagecoach lurched violently over the rocky trail, and Clara was thrown against the side wall. Pain shot through her shoulder, and a small cut opened on her arm. Blood began to stain the sleeve of her dress. She bit her lip to keep from screaming, trying desperately to hold herself steady as the coach tilted and rocked. Inside, the passengers screamed in fear. The mother tried to comfort her child, who had begun to cry loudly, while the older man muttered prayers under his breath. The masked men climbed onto the sides of the coach, their boots clanging against the wood. One of them reached inside the open window, trying to grab satchels and belongings. Clara instinctively pulled her satchel closer, holding it as tightly as she could. Her fingers were trembling, but she refused to let go. The stagecoach driver shouted, urging the horses forward, but the attacker's presence made it nearly impossible to control the animals. One robber swung from the side of the coach, landing heavily on the roof. The impact caused the stagecoach to tilt dangerously, and Clara lost her footing. Her heart pounded and her mind raced with fear. She had to stay upright, had to survive. But the jolt was too much. Before she could react, the coach hit a particularly rough patch of rocky ground. Clara was thrown violently from her seat, her body flying through the air before she landed hard on the dirt road below. Pain exploded through her arm and side, and she gasped as the wind was knocked out of her. Dirt and small stones scraped her skin, and the rough tumble left her disoriented. She tried to move, but her legs felt weak, her body trembling from shock. Her sleeve was soaked with blood from a deep scratch along her arm, and a bruise was already forming on her hip. She blinked rapidly, trying to understand what had just happened. The stagecoach was no longer a safe place. It had become a source of danger. From the ground, Clara saw the robbers climbing back onto the coach. They were shouting, laughing, and kicking at the door to ensure no one could escape easily. The driver struggled to control the horses, urging them forward while trying to avoid the rocks and ruts that littered the trail. The animals were panicked, their hooves pounding against the stones in a chaotic rhythm. Clara realized with a sinking feeling that she was completely alone, lying in the dirt, while the stagecoach and its occupants were still under attack. Fear consumed her, but Clara forced herself to think. She needed to survive. She tried to crawl toward the side of the trail, but the pain in her arm and side made every movement excruciating. The blood on her sleeve reminded her that she was hurt, that she needed help. She pressed herself against the ground, trying to make herself small, invisible in the hope that the robbers might not notice her. Her mind raced with desperate thoughts. Maybe if she stayed still, they would leave. Maybe she could crawl to safety before anyone saw her. The sounds of chaos were overwhelming. Shouts, the clatter of hooves, and the pounding of the stagecoach wheels on rocks filled the air. Clara's ears rang, and her vision blurred at the edges. Dust swirled around her, making it hard to see the robbers clearly. Her heart pounded with fear, but she forced herself to take slow, careful breaths. Panic could not help her now. She needed clarity. She tried to focus on one thing at a time, lifting her head slightly to watch the movements of the attackers and the stagecoach. Then suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the air. The stagecoach had struck a large rock, sending one of the wheels splintering under the impact. The vehicle lurched violently, and Clara winced at the sound. From her position on the ground, she could see the passengers inside being jostled violently. The mother screamed as her child cried out. The older man clutched at the seat for support, and the man with the low hat lunged to help steady the coach. The chaos was absolute. No one could control what was happening, and the attackers seemed to be taking full advantage of the confusion. Clara's body shook with exhaustion and fear. She knew she could not stay lying there forever. The robbers were focused on the stagecoach, not on her, but she was still in danger. Every moment she remained exposed increased the risk of being discovered. She tried to rise, but her legs gave way under her. Pain radiated through her hip and side, and the scratches on her arm burned. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to move inch by inch, dragging her body toward a small dip in the ground where she could hide partially from view. As she crawled, she saw one of the robbers leaning out of the coach window, reaching for belongings. His eyes were wild, his movements aggressive. Clara pressed herself flat against the earth, willing him not to see her. She held her breath as the robber's gaze swept past, feeling a small thrill of relief when he passed without noticing her. But she knew it was only temporary. The danger was still very real, and the stagecoach was not yet out of the woods. Clara's mind raced with questions. Would the driver manage to control the horses? Would the passengers be able to defend themselves? She did not know. All she could do was focus on survival, on staying low and moving carefully. Each movement was agonizing, but she forced herself to continue. She reminded herself that fear was natural, but it could not paralyze her. She was alone, hurt, and vulnerable, but she was determined to endure. The robbers had begun shouting at one another, some climbing down from the coach to gather what they could, others remaining on top to maintain control. Clara could hear their boots crunching on the dirt and the clatter of weapons against the wooden floor. The noise was deafening, yet strangely, it gave her a sense of rhythm. She could predict their movements, anticipate where they might go next, and use the moments of distraction to inch closer to the safety of the trees lining the trail. Suddenly, Clara felt a jolt of fear stronger than anything before. The stagecoach hit another rock, and the roof tilted dangerously. One of the robbers lost his balance, teetering on the edge before catching himself. The older man inside the coach shouted a warning, and the mother clutched her child tighter. Clara's stomach lurched as she realized how close she had been to being struck by the falling figure. Her body trembled uncontrollably, both from fear and from the pain of her injuries. And then, just when it seemed she could not endure anymore, the stagecoach veered sharply to the side, and one of the back doors swung open. Clara's instincts screamed at her. She tried to move faster, crawling toward a safer position, but her body could not respond quickly enough. The momentum of the vehicle, the chaos of the moment, and her own weakened state combined to create a dangerous situation. She felt herself being pulled slightly by the air as the coach lurched again. Her heart leapt. She knew what was coming next. She was about to be thrown from the stagecoach completely. In a heartbeat, the world tilted violently. Clara's body was lifted, thrown into the air by the force of the stagecoach tipping on the uneven trail. Time seemed to slow as she felt herself spinning, the wind rushing past her ears, dust stinging her eyes, and the pain in her arm and side intensifying. Her satchel flew from her grasp, spinning away into the dust. She cried out, though the sound was lost in the chaos around her. And then, with a sickening thud, she hit the ground hard, rolling once before coming to a stop in a small dip in the dirt. Pain exploded through her body. She groaned, trying to move, but her arm burned and her side throbbed with every breath. Her sleeve was soaked with blood from the deep scratch on her arm, and her dress was torn and dirty. She lay there for a moment, breathing heavily, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The stagecoach was still visible in the distance, rocking and jerking as the robbers scrambled inside. She was alive, but barely. Every nerve in her body screamed in pain and fear. Clara pressed herself flat against the ground, feeling the heat of her own blood and the cold dirt beneath her. Her chest heaved as she struggled to calm herself. She whispered over and over that she would survive, that she could make it through this. She had no idea how, but she refused to give up. In that moment, lying alone and hurt, Clara understood the true meaning of fear and the equally powerful need to fight for life. Clara lay on the ground, trembling from pain, exhaustion, and fear. Her arm throbbed where it had scraped against the rough dirt, and her side ached with every shallow breath she took. Dusk clung to her hair, and the morning sun had begun to rise, casting light across the rolling hills, but the brightness did little to ease the terror still gripping her heart. She tried to move again, but her legs refused to cooperate. Each attempt to crawl was met with sharp pain that forced her to stop. She pressed herself flat against the earth, hoping that, somehow, she could remain unseen. The stagecoach was no longer in sight, the robbers having driven it farther down the trail. For a moment she thought she was entirely alone. Panic began to creep back in, whispering cruel thoughts into her mind. What if no one came? What if she was stuck here, hurt and defenseless with no help in sight? Her hands shook as she clutched the dirt, tears stinging her eyes. She could hear the wind rustling through the sparse trees nearby, the occasional cry of a distant bird, and the faint sound of the trail behind her. Just as despair began to weigh heavily on her, a sudden sound cut through the quiet, the soft thudding of hooves against the dirt. Clara's heart leapt. She froze, unsure whether it was more danger approaching or someone coming to help. Through the rising dust, a figure began to emerge. At first, she could see only the silhouette of a rider on a horse, moving with purpose. The man was dressed simply, with a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat, the kind worn by cowboys and travelers in the area. But there was something different about him. He did not seem to carry the menace of the robbers. As the rider drew closer, Clara could make out his features. His face was calm, but there was a determination in his eyes that gave her a sudden spark of hope. He was strong and capable-looking, with hands that seemed ready to act at a moment's notice. The horse he rode was steady, its hooves striking the earth with confidence, as if it too knew that this was no ordinary ride. The cowboy rode up to Clara, slowing the horse as he reached her and finally stopped just a few feet away. "Are you hurt?" the man called, his voice calm but urgent. Clara nodded weakly, unable to speak at first. Her throat felt dry and her lips quivered as she tried to form words. I fell," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. The cowboy dismounted quickly, landing gracefully on the ground. He moved toward her with care, his boots crunching softly against the dirt, and knelt beside her. "Don't move too much," he said gently. "I'll help you." His tone was steady and reassuring, and for the first time since the stagecoach was attacked, Clara felt a glimmer of relief. The pain in her body was still intense, but the presence of someone willing to help gave her hope. She tried to smile weakly, grateful beyond words, as the cowboy carefully examined the scratches and bruises on her arm and side. The man, whose name Clara would soon learn was Samuel, took a small cloth from his coat and began to clean the worst of the blood from her arm. He worked quickly but gently, his hands steady despite the chaos of the morning. Clara felt a strange comfort in his calm presence. He spoke softly, asking her about her injuries, offering words of reassurance that seemed almost impossible in the middle of the wilderness. Each word was a lifeline, each movement a reminder that she was no longer alone. Once he had cleaned the worst of her wounds, Samuel draped his coat over her shoulders, creating a shield against the cool morning air. Clara shivered slightly, both from pain and from the lingering fear of what had happened. Samuel helped her sit up slowly, making sure she did not strain herself. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said. Clara nodded, though her body felt like lead. She had no idea how she would manage to move on her own, but she trusted him completely. Samuel guided her carefully to his horse, helping her swing onto the animal with gentle hands. She held onto him tightly, grateful for the stability and support he provided. The horse, trained for such situations, remained calm, walking steadily along the dirt trail. Clara felt a mixture of fear and relief. The world was still dangerous, the hills wild and unpredictable, but with Samuel beside her, the terror felt more manageable. As they rode, Samuel kept a watchful eye on the surrounding hills, scanning for any signs of the robbers or other dangers. His experience as a traveler and protector was evident in every movement, every glance. Clara felt safe in a way she had not since the attack began. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the rolling landscape and casting long shadows behind the hills. The wind was cool against her face, carrying the scent of dry grass and earth, and for the first time in hours, Clara could breathe more fully. Samuel handed her a small flask of water, and she took tiny sips, grateful for the relief it brought. Her lips were dry, and her throat sore from the terror and screaming of the attack. The water cooled her burning mouth and helped calm her racing heartbeat. "You're safe now," Samuel said quietly. "I won't let anything happen to you." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of someone who meant them fully. Clara nodded, feeling tears prick her eyes. Relief and gratitude welled up inside her, mingled with the lingering fear of what she had endured. The ride to the nearest town was slow, carefully measured to avoid jostling Clara too much. Every bump of the horse against the uneven trail sent sharp reminders of her injuries, but Samuel's careful guidance kept her from being thrown or hurt further. Along the way, Clara asked questions quietly, curious about the man who had saved her. Samuel spoke little of himself, focusing instead on her well-being, but the few words he shared revealed a life spent traveling the wild lands, helping those in trouble and knowing how dangerous the world could be. Despite the lingering fear, Clara began to relax slightly. She realized that she could trust him, that he had saved her life in more ways than one. She glanced around at the landscape, seeing it now with a mixture of awe and caution. The hills were wild and untamed, but the beauty of the sunrise, the colors of the sky, and the quiet majesty of the rolling land gave her a sense of hope. Perhaps there was still goodness in the world, even in a place as harsh and dangerous as the Wild West. The journey continued in silence for a while, broken only by the soft sound of the horse's hooves and Clara's quiet breathing. She rested her head against Samuel's shoulder, feeling the warmth and strength of his presence. Every few minutes he would glance back at her, ensuring she was all right. His vigilance gave her courage, and she felt her confidence growing. Though she was hurt and shaken, she knew that with his help, she could survive the morning and reach safety. Eventually, the outline of the town appeared in the distance, a small cluster of buildings, smoke rising from chimneys, and the faint sound of people beginning their day. Clara's heart lifted at the sight. She could feel the tension in her body easing, replaced by a cautious hope. Samuel guided the horse carefully toward the town, alert to every movement, every sound. The closer they came, the more Clara realized that she was on the path to safety, and that the nightmare of the attack might finally be over. As they reached the town, Samuel led Clara to a small inn, the kind travelers depended on when they were weary, injured, or in need of help. He helped her dismount, supporting her weight with his steady hands. Clara felt weak but grateful, leaning on him as they moved inside. The innkeeper, seeing Clara's condition and the state of her clothes, rushed forward with towels and water. Samuel guided her to a quiet room where she could rest and recover. Once she was seated on a bed, Samuel gently checked her wounds again. Clara felt a mixture of pain and relief as he cleaned the cuts and applied bandages. He worked quickly, efficiently, and with great care, his hands steady and precise. Clara marveled at his skill and the calm reassurance he brought to an otherwise chaotic morning. She realized that she owed her life to him, and the depth of her gratitude filled her heart. After tending to her injuries, Samuel stood by the window, watching the hills outside. Clara noticed the strength in his posture, the alertness in his eyes, and the quiet determination that had guided him to find her in time. She realized that he had risked his own safety to save a stranger, and the thought humbled her. She had survived a terrifying ordeal, and it was because of the courage and kindness of a man she barely knew. Clara leaned back, closing her eyes briefly, feeling the exhaustion wash over her. The pain was still there, but it was softened by the comfort of safety, by the presence of someone who cared. Samuel sat down beside her quietly, offering words of reassurance, though he did not force conversation. In that moment, Clara understood the true meaning of rescue, not just saving a life, but restoring hope, trust, and a sense of security in a world that could be cruel and unpredictable. Hours passed, and Clara's body began to recover from the shock. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat calmed, and the tension in her muscles eased. She looked at Samuel with deep appreciation. He had saved her from the chaos of the Stagecoach attack and had carried her through the wilderness to safety. More than that, he had offered her kindness, patience, and protection when she needed it most. For Clara, this was not just a rescue, it was a turning point, a reminder that courage and compassion could be found even in the harshest places. By the time the sun reached its highest point, Clara was feeling stronger, though still weak. Samuel remained nearby, keeping watch over her and ensuring that she was comfortable. The inn was quiet, allowing her to rest, and the town outside began its daily rhythm. Clara realized that life could continue, that she could heal, and that the terrifying morning on the stagecoach was behind her. And though she would never forget the fear she had felt, She also knew that she would never forget the man who had appeared just in time, lifting her from despair and guiding her to safety. Clara woke to the soft glow of sunlight, filtering through the thin curtains of the small inn room. The faint sounds of the town outside, the clip-clop of horses, the murmur of voices, and the occasional creak of doors, reminded her that life was continuing beyond the room's quiet walls. For a moment she stayed still, letting the warmth of the morning sun touch her face, and she realized how deeply exhausted she was. Her body ached from the fall and the attack, but the worst of the fear had begun to fade, replaced by a sense of cautious relief. She moved slowly, testing her bruised muscles and stiff limbs. Her arm was bandaged neatly, and the throbbing pain in her side had lessened, thanks to the care she had received the day before. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what had happened settle in her mind. Only yesterday she had been hurled from a stagecoach, surrounded by chaos and fear. Today she was alive, safe, and beginning to heal. The realization made her eyes fill with tears, not of sorrow this time, but of gratitude. Samuel had stayed nearby overnight, ensuring she was comfortable and protected. He had made arrangements with the innkeeper for food, water, and a warm bed, leaving her to rest while he tended to other matters in town. Clara remembered the moment he had first appeared in the dust of the wilderness, lifting her from the ground and placing her gently on his horse. It was a memory that remained vivid in her mind, a moment of kindness and bravery that had saved her life. She felt a deep sense of respect and appreciation for the cowboy who had appeared when she needed help the most. As she sat on the edge of the bed, Clara thought about the attack on the stagecoach. She remembered the sudden terror, the masked robbers, the violent jolts of the coach, and the moment she had been thrown to the ground. The fear she had felt then seemed almost unimaginable now, yet it had been real. She shivered slightly at the memory, realizing how fragile life could be and how quickly everything could change. But alongside that fear was a stronger emotion, gratitude. She had survived, and she had someone to thank for that survival. When Samuel returned to check on her later that morning, Clara offered him a small, grateful smile. I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. Her voice was hoarse from yesterday's stress and from the quiet tears she had shed while resting. Samuel shrugged lightly, a modest gesture that seemed almost out of place after the courage he had shown. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I did what anyone would do if they saw someone in danger." Clara shook her head. "No, not everyone would," she insisted. "You saved my life," Samuel nodded, his eyes calm but kind. "I'm glad you're safe, that's all that matters." He helped her sit up fully and offered her some water and bread. Clara accepted it gratefully, feeling the nourishment strengthen her body. She had eaten little since the fall, and the simple meal brought her comfort. As she chewed, she thought about how quickly life could turn from ordinary to terrifying, and how fortunate she was that Samuel had been there at the right moment. The day passed slowly, but Clara found comfort in small things: the warmth of the sunlight, the soft bed, the sound of birds outside, and the quiet presence of Samuel nearby. She asked him questions about the town, about the people who lived there, and about the world beyond the hills she had just crossed. He answered with simple, practical stories, teaching her about the routines of the town, the way travelers survived in the wilderness, and the ways people protected themselves from danger. Each story was practical, but to Clara, they felt like lifelines, pieces of wisdom she would carry with her for the rest of her life. As evening approached, Clara felt strong enough to step outside briefly. Samuel guided her carefully to the inn's small porch, helping her steady herself as she took in the sights and sounds of the town. Children ran through the dirt streets, women carried baskets of food and water, and men tended to their horses or worked on repairs. It was ordinary life, mundane yet comforting, and it reminded Clara that the world continued beyond fear and danger. She realized that life could be unpredictable, yes, but it could also be kind, steady, and beautiful. Clara spent the next few days slowly regaining her strength. Each morning she woke, she could feel her body healing, the bruises on her arms fading, the cuts closing, and the stiffness in her muscles easing. She practiced walking carefully, testing her legs, and gradually regained confidence in her movements. Samuel remained by her side during this recovery, providing support, guidance, and reassurance. His presence was steady, calm, and unwavering, a stark contrast to the chaos she had faced on the stagecoach. During this time, Clara reflected on the events that had brought her to this point. She thought about the stagecoach ride, the ambush, the fear, and the violence she had witnessed. And yet, she also thought about Samuel, the man who had appeared like a guardian when she needed him most. She realized that courage was not just about confronting danger, but about showing kindness, patience, and compassion in the most critical moments. Samuel had embodied all of these qualities, and Clara felt a deep sense of admiration for him. One afternoon, Clara asked Samuel to tell her more about his life. He spoke modestly, recounting stories of his travels, the people he had helped, and the lessons he had learned along the way. He did not boast, nor did he seek recognition. He simply shared his experiences, offering Clara insight into the resilience required to survive in a world that could be harsh and unpredictable. Clara listened intently, inspired by the quiet strength he demonstrated, and realized that heroism could be simple and everyday, rather than grand and dramatic. As Clara's strength returned, she began to think about the journey ahead. She knew she would soon leave the safety of the town and continue to her home, where family and friends awaited her. But she also understood that she had been changed by the experience. The fear she had endured, the pain she had felt, and the kindness she had received had all left an imprint on her heart. She felt a renewed sense of awareness about the fragility of life, the importance of courage, and the power of compassion. The day came when Clara felt strong enough to leave the inn. Samuel helped her prepare, checking her bandages, ensuring she had enough supplies for the journey, and guiding her to the edge of town where the trail continued. Clara looked back at the inn, feeling a mixture of gratitude and sadness. It had been a place of safety, healing, and reflection, and she knew she would remember it always. She turned to Samuel, offering him a sincere smile. "Thank you for everything," she said. "I will never forget what you did for me." Samuel nodded, tipping his hat in a quiet gesture of respect. "Take care of yourself," he said simply. "Be careful on the trail, and remember what you've learned." Clara felt a lump in her throat as she watched him walk away, understanding that this moment marked both an ending and a beginning, the end of her immediate danger, and the beginning of a new chapter shaped by courage, gratitude, and hope. As she walked along the trail, Clara reflected on the events that had brought her here. The stagecoach, the attack, the fall, and the rescue had all seemed overwhelming at the time, but now she could see them as part of a larger journey. She had faced fear, pain, and uncertainty, yet she had survived. She had also experienced the unexpected kindness of a stranger who had risked his own safety to save her. The memory of Samuel's calm, steady presence would remain with her forever, a reminder that even in the darkest moments there could be light. Clara thought about how the experience had changed her. She felt stronger, more aware, and more appreciative of life's fragile beauty. She understood that danger could appear at any moment, but so could courage, compassion, and hope. She realized that the world was unpredictable, yet full of possibilities, and that even small acts of kindness could have profound effects. She vowed to carry these lessons with her, sharing them with others whenever she could, and remembering the man who had taught her their value through action rather than words. As the sun began to set, casting warm orange and pink hues across the hills, Clara felt a sense of peace she had not known since the attack. The trail stretched before her, leading toward home, toward family, and toward a future that was no longer defined by fear. She walked with steady steps, feeling the strength returning to her legs and the warmth of gratitude filling her heart. Though the memories of the stagecoach and the attack would remain, they no longer held power over her. She had survived, learned, and grown stronger. By the time Clara reached the edge of the next town, she had fully regained her confidence. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she also knew that she had the inner strength to face them. And somewhere in her heart, she carried the memory of Samuel, the cowboy who had appeared in her darkest moment and guided her to safety. His courage, kindness, and quiet strength had shown her that even in a world full of danger, goodness could prevail. Clara's journey continued, but she was no longer the same person who had climbed onto the stagecoach that fateful morning. She had been tested by fear, pain, and uncertainty, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The experience had left her with a profound appreciation for life, for the people who helped her along the way, and for the unexpected moments of courage that could change everything. And as she moved forward, she knew that the lessons of that morning, the value of hope, the power of kindness, and the strength within herself, would remain with her forever.